Muy buenas a todos, soy Mariatxi, bienvenidos a un nuevo juego, bienvenidos a un nuevo indie. Bueno, ahora toca el turno a Bright Paw Definitive Edition, ¿vale? Juego que salió el 1 de septiembre del 2020, no, sí, 1 de septiembre de 2020 y me imagino sea el Bright Paw, porque según parece aquí, pues hay una actualización importante, que es la Definitive Edition, que salió el 28 de julio de este 2022, ¿vale? Es un juego que me han enviado, agradecer a la desarrolladora editor que, bueno, pues que me lo han enviado, 10,79 euros, estamos asesinatos, misterios, puzzles y gatos. Ahora que está muy de moda el juego de los gatitos, pues ahí está en español. Una aventura de puzzles única con más de 300 niveles, desafiando tu intelecto, compleja historia doblada para actores profesionales, juego por turnos, determinar diseñar tu propia estrategia. Un pequeño juego de puzzles, el que jugaremos con un pequeño gato llamado Teo. Buen juego, buena música, buen juego, buenos puzzles, buen juego. Me encanta que seas confuso, pero te montas tus teorías. Bueno, pues lo dicho, vamos a probar este Bright Paw Definite Edition. Vamos a ver qué tal. Vamos a ver cómo está New Game. Primero vamos a poner el idioma. Español, subtítulos sí, modo alguna ayuda es no. Atrás, extras no sé qué es. Oh, qué bonito el gato. Bueno, la música por ahí es ajustes. Vamos a la música como está. Juego. Adaptar la calidad. Resolución dinámica sí. General. Volumen. Yo creo que está bien, ¿no? El audio. También los títulos. Color. Pim pam. Controles. Menú de juego. O sea, podemos jugar con. Vale, selección de cartas. Con el ratón. Vale. ¿Te cuenta compartir información de acuerdo a las políticas? No, no quiero nada de esto. Vale. Pues. Vamos a probar, ¿no? Este gatuno.
Oh, there you are, Theo. Honestly, it's your own dream. Do you even know where you are? Ah, well, it's time we got you sorted out with these cards. Come on now, we haven't got all day.
Selecciona la carta y pulsa para jugarla. O sea, nos movemos con cartas.
Rewind button and tap, and we'll see if we can't start walking around things instead of into them. If you ever find yourself in a pickle, just remember that you can take a step back and try something else. Now, give these a whirl and see where they get you.
El inconveniente es, ¿se puede rotar? Se tiene que poder rotar, tío. Espera, igual se juega hasta mejor con teclado y con ratón. Visto lo visto. A nosotros para echar para atrás. Es que lo suyo sería poder rotar, pero bueno. Es que no veo dónde estoy. Vale. Ah, pues parece bien con el ratón, pero ¿cómo? Ah, con la palanca. Vale, vale. Joder, qué rápido esto. Uy. No sé si... No me aclaro con el... Un alero que no deja despertar el subconsciente de Teo.
I wonder what that's doing sitting around here. Maybe you should keep your eyes open for other interesting things. You never know what you'll find. Well, we're done here. Go on, leap into your family's arms. Lauren and Nathaniel are waiting.
Bueno, asesinato. Capítulo 1, despertando.
Ah! What was that? Oh, okay. Well, after being woken unceremoniously by a sudden noise, our hero Theo felt that if he was to be kept awake, he deserved to know why.
Calentita cómoda y tentadora. Un recordatorio de que soñar es gratis. Carta de admisión de Joshua. Una carta de admisión de una prestigiosa universidad. Quizás la prueba de la inteligencia es hereditaria. Primero, siempre hay que dar el hecho de que la inteligencia se reconozca. Hay tres objetos.
Hearing the yelling from the kitchen, Theo wondered if he had really moved from his bed just to listen to some tiff.
Maleta hecha a toda prisa. Parece que la maleta ha sido muy rápido y luego la dejaron tirada. Foto familiar. A pesar de las poses raras, el orgullo y la felicidad se pueden apreciar claramente en esta foto. Nadie lo toca ni lo limpia, pero sigue siendo imponente. Vale.
Perhaps things were a little more serious than he'd thought.
Cinco
The kitchen
pistas.
seemed normal. Except, what was that he could see across the room? He had to take a closer look.
Una de las posiciones más preciadas de Theo. Dentro no hay comida, ni conocimientos, ni respuestas. Un selfie de Joshua durante sus viajes al terminar sus estudios enviado a sus padres como recuerdo. Quien dijera que el perro es el mejor amigo del hombre no había visto esta foto de un niño y su gato.
God. Theo couldn't believe what he was seeing. His family, motionless on the floor. But that was it. No gun? Nothing at all. Was someone else here? As he turned away, Theo could only think about one thing. Someone was surely responsible for this. And he had to know who. Cautiously examining the hallway, Theo saw no signs of the killer. Instead, he found a path of destruction carved through strange machines before him.
Vino de la juventud ajeno a la aplastante decepción de la realidad tras terminar los estudios. Como todos los relojes antiguos, su tic-tac es un recordatorio constante de la lenta evolución del universo hacia la entropía. Un extraño robot hecho pedazos. Vale. De todas formas, si te da la pista así.
The more he realized that something was amiss. That bright red light hadn't always been there, had it?
Láseres.
The image of his departed owners, Theo suddenly found himself somewhere very different indeed. However, before he could appreciate his new surroundings, he found his attention drawn to the glowing hot wall of energy in front of him.
robot de aspecto moderno y amenazador que se encuentra inmóvil e inútil.
Faced with something so clearly hazardous, he thought it might be wise to take a moment to think before diving headlong into oblivion. Oh, what a pleasant surprise! After his daring maneuver, Theo found that he was still alive. Unfortunately, there was one more laser to slip past. Theo glared at the broken robot blocking his path. After risking his life twice, he was in no mood for this obstruction. Perhaps that broken vent offered salvation. Still somewhat tense from his previous trial, Theo was immensely relieved to find no deadly lasers when he emerged from the vent. On the other hand, he was instead faced with a functional, frantic, and quite soggy security robot.
Pero su consejero diciendo gira sus ruedas para tratar de limpiar lo que alguien ha ensuciado. Esta vez se llama Fergus y su mirada fría como el acero asustaría hasta el más hambriento de los felinos. Necesitas proteger tus propiedades submarinas. Estas maravillas de la tecnología demuestran rápidamente el significado de la propiedad privada. Me ha dicho así.
As he skirted by the distracted machine, Theo found himself eyeing the hole-riddled aquarium. Either someone was stalking the halls shooting at water features, or the security needed to work on their aim. Though the appeal of fresh fish was enticing, it was offset by the risk of an unexpected bath. Rather than contemplate such a terrible fate any further, Theo decided to make a quick exit. Advancing cautiously, Theo was encouraged by the sight of another aquarium, this time with the water safely inside, not threatening to unpleasantly dampen his fur. There was no time to fish, however, as security appeared to be taking its job a touch more seriously.
Fiable, sigilosa y efectiva. Un arma imprescindible para el delincuente profesional y ahora con múltiples opciones de personalización según sus necesidades. No me he fijado cuántas había. ¿Está viva? No estoy segura. Muerta puede ser, indiferente ante la situación actual, desde luego. Una muestra de respeto innecesario pero sincera a los verdaderos seres supremos que gobiernan la Tierra. Bueno.
Although Theo could be easily distracted, he knew when it was time to focus. Tearing his attention away from the unattainable, Theo delicately stepped between the broken remains of some very expensive-looking showpieces. Despite his lack of any understanding of fine art, he was disgusted by the wanton destruction before him. Having successfully weaved past the searching eyes of the guard, he was overjoyed to
Y me
see
sobran,
him
pasagos y te sobran.
killer through a door, instead of crawling through the ventilation like a rodent.
Pues hasta ahora es bastante sencillo, ¿no?
Theo cast his eyes about the grandiose room, the impressive decor marred by the smoking wreckage of robotic guards. Clearly, someone with no respect for interior design had been this way. However, hanging over the remains of a reception desk, Theo spotted something that took his interest. Bright Paw Industries.
Ofrece una variedad de vidas para genios malvados. Lástima no está diseñada para felinos.
Despite the damage, the underlying class of this Bright Paw establishment was clear. The placement
Robot recepcionista, aunque este robot esté muerto de miedo, se niega a abandonar su puesto de recepción. Eso llama compromiso. Este sorteo de la empresa fue del lugar entre los escombros.
Theo crossed the room, breathing in the intoxicating fragrance of fish, while taking care to avoid the remaining hazards. As he did, his mind began to wander. Why was a place like this situated beneath his home? And more importantly, why had these fishy treats not been brought to his attention before? At first glance, it appeared that Theo had stumbled into a storage room for broken glass. Except there were other items in the glittering fragments. Grenades, missiles, an umbrella.
Cuando hay hora de actuar, a veces los malos eligen lo que siempre ha funcionado. Se ve centrado en su zona de patrulla. La mayor amenaza es que te atropelles sin querer. Bueno, imagino que lo suyo sea esperar. Vale.
Theo padded behind the guard, pondering his discoveries. A hidden underground facility, robotic security, and now rooms filled with odd weapons. What on earth was this place? Looking back, Theo considered that it was perhaps unwise to leave such destructive toys lying around. On the other hand, there was no way someone would leave live explosives on display. Probably best to ignore it and hurry on. Theo contemplated the ruins of the once magnificent boardroom, which had been reduced to little more than burnt mahogany by some kind of explosion. Apparently, the killer had needed to clear the room in a hurry. But why? Oh, perhaps those lasers were a motivator.
Nace el ingenio de él. Los considero su primer verdadero éxito en la vida, sellados con un apretón de las manos e inmortalizados en papel. Estas sillas están diseñadas para ayudar a llevar la voz cantante durante una región, eliminando a los asistentes no deseados.
With the wall of death slowly advancing, Theo scrambled for a plan to slip by. There, across the room, a shattered glass wall offering a glimpse of escape. Deftly avoiding glass with his paws, Theo found his eyes drawn to a large.
Sí podemos pasar, ¿no? Sí.
Was that Nathaniel? As he stood, he wondered, how much of all this was his master responsible for?
¿Cuántos capítulos pueden ser? Bueno, voy a pasar de buscarlos. Bueno, pasar no. Es que encima te los dicen, tío. Está.
Obviously, the killer had been looting the facility. and it was unlikely that they planned to use volatile weaponry to spread peace and joy. Being a conscientious cat, Theo knew it fell to him to put a stop to the killer's nefarious activities. Finding himself inside a warehouse, the towering stacks of crates gave Theo some measure of hope. Perhaps the killer would try to search the top of an unstable pile and fall to their doom. Lost in daydreams of the killer being buried alive, Theo stepped blindly forwards onto a conveyor belt, promptly shuffling him away from his happy thoughts. Perhaps it was unlikely that the killer would be ended by fallen cargo, but the belts leading into the dark and deadly machinery seemed to promise an untimely demise. Spotting a bundle under some nearby crates, it appeared Theo's wishes had been heard. However, he tempered his excitement until he could get a closer look. Stepping over a broken belt with great care, he was disappointed to discover not a body, but simply several empty crates bearing the label High Explosive.
Pez cacao. Cierto.
Spotting a bundle under some nearby crates, it appeared Theo's wishes had been heard. However, he tempered his excitement until he could get a closer look.
Pero no puedo esperar.
Theo tempered his excitement. He didn't lose it. Stepping over a broken belt with great care, he was disappointed to discover not a body, but simply several empty crates bearing the label High Explosive. The empty crates led Theo to conclude three things. The killer had found what they were looking for, they were definitely up to something, and Theo's work was not yet done. He moved on with the hope that the killer's loot would be enough to slow them down. Theo pondered the erratic crusade of the robots as they fired at non-existent threats. Perhaps the killer had just passed through? The belt, unable to tell the difference between the cat and the crate, and lacking the desire to learn, moved him once again as it would any other box. As he headed for the door, Theo couldn't shake the feeling that the strange blue algae was creeping steadily across the wall behind him. Oh well, it was probably harmless. Whoever Theo was following had certainly spooked these poor robots who were all consumed by blind panic.
Qué gana, a ver.
carefully padded forwards, avoiding lasers, Theo noticed a most curious drawing etched into the wall. But why would a killer stop to doodle? Theo couldn't stop thinking about the
Coño, que
bizarre
disparan.
graffiti he kept seeing. It was unlikely the killer was taking the time for artistic creativity. Was someone else in the vicinity?
No sabía que disparan, no he fijado.
As he stepped into the room, Theo found his racing mind halted by yet another drawing of a slightly more significant scale. As he began to move away, Theo couldn't help but wonder.
Es un poco de ensayo de error también.
Into these acts of vandalism. Was it maybe some kind of poorly drawn calling card? Perhaps, he thought as he carried on, the murderer was simply an awful artist. Whatever it was, the mural failed to hold Theo's interest long enough for any meaning to be gleaned. According to the booming sounds of heavy industry and the massive shipping containers, Theo had found himself in some kind of loading station. Theo's eye was caught by something colourful and clearly out of place hanging from a rail across the room. A discarded tie. Was this some kind of taunt? It was becoming clear to Theo that the large boxes wouldn't just wait for him to cross, so he quickened his pace towards the infuriating clue. Clearly the killer had left this tie to send a message, but in doing so they had left a trail for Theo to follow. Perhaps he'd get the better of them yet. Though he was intrigued by the surprisingly expressive train waiting before him, on the other side of the tracks a curious hole in the wall drew his eye. Perhaps the killer had made their own exit. Stepping onto the train, Theo glanced towards his goal and noticed a strangely carefree-looking robot bumbling around near a control panel. Hopefully this one wasn't a threat. The train began to quake, and Theo couldn't react fast enough to leap off. He had better find something to hold on to.
Anda, vamos en el tren.
Theo was quite unprepared for the sudden velocity and found his current predicament extremely upsetting. Luckily, he just needed to hold on until the train looped back to the station. As the hatch broke free and rocketed past him, Theo pressed himself against the train and vowed to dedicate the rest of the ride to
Es curioso el,
for low-flying objects of feline destruction.
el narrador, ¿no?
Theo might have found some comfort knowing he wasn't the only one caught unaware by the sudden departure. But it was all he could do to just keep his paws on the ground.
La he liado. Que la tapa sale por 6. No sé si nos pega la tapa, ¿eh? Es la duda que tengo, claro.
Theo tried not to let the burning robot distract him from his efforts to survive.
La putada, ¿no? No puedo salir. No puedo meter, tío. Ahora sí. No, me come.
In the distance, Theo could just about spot the station, approaching at a rapid pace. He just had to hold on a little longer.
Ah, he vuelto a la estación.
Theo staggered off the train quickly, driven by his newfound appreciation for solid ground and the terrible fear that it might suddenly set off again. Just ahead of him, he could see that bloody robot that had sent the train off in the first place.
Bueno. Este es bastante sencillo, ¿no? Quitando ese tramo del túnel del túnel o del tren que...
Theo eyed his new surroundings curiously, noting the piles of unused tiles and pipes. Across what little floor existed, there was a sharp drop, from which a blinding light and tremendous heat emanated. Beside this abyss sat... that bloody robot.
Bueno, ahí lo vamos a dejar, ¿vale? No se espera otra cosilla, pero bueno, ahí lo tenéis. El gato detective, cartas, que es que encima te dicen el destino, te dicen todo. 10 euritos, está en castellano, la música está bien. El gameplay, pues dentro de los juegos de puzzles que hemos jugado es bastante sencillo. Creo que hemos jugado juegos más interesantes de puzzles. No prometo nada, creo que se quedará ahí. No puede ser muy largo, las cosas como son. No puede ser muy largo el juego. 4 horitas te puede llevar como mucho. no puede durar mucho. Así que bueno, ya sabéis, un buen like, un buen comentario, una suscripción. Seguiremos dándole a esto de los videojuegos. Y bueno, nos vemos. Adiós.